The number one thing to recognize here, and it isn't about the personalities of Trump or anyone else that's actually in Washington. It's about the output of their decision making and choice making. Here's their first challenge, all of them. They've never been here before. There's never been a Bitcoin or currency council before. There's never been
Mhm.
36 trillion in debt before. The dollar's never only been worth 2.7 cents before. We've never had this many threats around us before. We've never been this broke before. The Federal Reserve has never been here before. They've never bailed out the financial world in its entirety in 2008, 9, 10, and 11 before. Central bank has never carried $9 trillion of debt on its books before. We've never had 70 million people retire before. We've never switched from a manufacturing country to a spending country before. Our economy seems to need every printed dollar and every dollar spent within its boundaries every second of the day, or it goes under. So we've been in a depression, mathematically speaking, since 2009, but you don't feel it because the debt has gone from 15 trillion back then to 36 trillion. So if you get 20 trillion from outside your economy because it came out of thin air, yeah, it's going to produce an effect. It keeps the lights on. You can pay the bills you don't have the money to pay, but now your dollar dies as a resource.
Welcome to another RTD interview. Today, I'm excited to have returning guest, Mr. Paul Stone, the founder of Colonial Metals Group. And today, he's joining us to share his thoughts on a variety of subject matter, and especially as we end 2024 and heading into 2025. There's lots of things worth keeping an eye on. And there's no better guest to talk to than Paul Stone. So I'm going to bring him on here. Paul, how are you doing, my good friend?
Great. How are you?
I'm excellent, man. As I mentioned, had a great Christmas holiday week and a lot of fun, food and everything in between. And yeah, so ending the year on a good note and excited for what lies ahead. And as always, don't want to just focus on the doom and gloom of everything, but want to make sure I continue to position people to be able to prosper in the days ahead by giving them some strategic insight. And you do a good job of bringing that. So I'm curious to pick your brain a little bit, and we can recap this past year, but also looking ahead, what are some things that are worth keeping an eye on? But before we get into there, I guess as we wrap up 2024, this will be the last interview of the year. What are some things, concerns, excites you about this previous year, and then what's going into the new year? Give us some thoughts.
I think starting maybe from backwards to forwards, most recent when in November back out to January, we could start there. But I think for time's sake, certainly now that it's a little bit of time has passed since the election, if you've ever seen the movie Red Dawn, that's where the Soviets were invading, and in common Americans, I think it was Patrick Swayze and a bunch of his buddies, they're in high school, I think at the time. They're like fighting the Soviets in Colorado. And the way the American spirit, the quest for things victorious, for overcoming wrongs and just things that go against humanistic DNA, the message that came out of the left during this election. When you see the state of Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, all voting in a way against something, they voted against weakness and just silly messages about how I don't know, just how we need to defeat exceptionalism. That election to me was way more about the American people. It was hugely about Trump, to use old George Bush term, hugely. That was a massive testimonial to me that the American spirit, the human spirit, when at least it has enough freedoms to be able to express itself mostly, the human creation is an unbelievable machine creation. And that really woke something up inside of me. It gave me faith and hope for our version of humanity here in America. That was massive to me.
Yeah, that's good. I do agree. And so I remember talking before the election process, and a lot of things seemed as if it was going to be some type of controversial event. And it seems to be at this current moment what could be a smoother transition than we anticipated. And so a part of me is, okay, that's great. But then there's the other part of me that, having done this for so long, anticipates something to just come out of left field to really shock people or surprise people. And so we have to wait and see about that moment. But in the meantime, it is definitely, we are on a right track heading in 2025. So my next thing is, outside of what we're facing here, there's a lot of geopolitical things that are also unraveling. And so we had Syria recently, Assad left and forced out and everything there. And of course, Ukraine, Russia still on the forefront. The Israeli-Palestinian is still a situation. China, Taiwan is still an issue. It may not be something that starts within our own borders, but then again, there might be something outside of our borders that incoming President Trump might have to address and be a part of, which could drag our nation into some type of event. But I want to piggyback on your roast South China made in America, and you updated it with some key things worth considering. If you don't mind, give us a little bit of your insights into writing this and how this could set up a 2025 that could come out of left field. What are you thinking?
So the biggest thing I'm starting to really draw illumination toward for people is that article isn't about China really at all. If we think about, let's pretend we have this technology that gives us a force shield, right?
Mhm.
Star Trek, Star Wars movies, you have a shield that can protect you from stuff incoming, right? Who's that supposed to be? That shield is supposed to be our elected officials, and the design of the shield is called the Constitution. The Constitution is a document, but it's so much more than that because it's a set of instructions. It's a design, it's a blueprint for how a country could operate for thousands of years and never fall apart and be an extremely happy, great, lovely, opportunity rich place to be born into or move toward. And so when you think about that, the shield, I'm trying to point out that our elected officials are not a shield. They're
Mhm.
not protecting us from anything because China was made in America. So when we look down at level B, we can stay there as a lot of us do. We just constantly staring at all the issues. And you said earlier, we'll have to wait and see what comes next. But with a hell of a shield, we wouldn't have to worry about what comes next because the people we put in power would be living lives, at least during their job, based on principles and truths, not self enrichment, like all we see the elected Congress people and the Senate and the House trading securities and enriching the hell out of themselves based off information they have, like Pelosi's the top of the iceberg there on as an example of that, where they'll just use the job to make sure their life improves, but they aren't giving much evidence at all of, in fact, the opposite is true, evidence of how they'll ignore our best interests and what we find important and what we need. So they're not going to recognize the Constitution is their overarching boss and that we create their paycheck. They're not operating that way. China was made in America. It didn't come up on its own by its own bootstraps. This is very important. It seems to me that yes, Kissinger, who I find a horrific human being when it comes to, I don't know what he was like as a dad or anything else, but as someone that our leaderships, elected leadership over decades turned to for input, advice, and decision making, his choice making sacrificed the American blueprint. It didn't embolden it. When you look at turning open the doors to China, for what? What did they offer us other than fireworks and cheap toys? Long ago, I was a kid. That's all I saw. When I got fireworks, I'd go up in Pennsylvania where they were legal and come back to Virginia where they were. As a kid, they all said made in China. That's the only time I thought of China. And I don't think they spent much time thinking about anyone else. They built a wall and they stayed tucked away. So here's some numbers. In 1989, it seems like they're down with taking our money. I'm sure corporations, leaders, bankers have been over there talking to them, trying to pry them into opening up that workforce to replace ours. How disgusting. So that's the number one proposition. The only reason to go deal with China would be to substitute our expensive workforce for theirs. Just let that hang out there for a minute. Our elected politicians, the corporations that are, we're loyal to brands, like in a big way. I grew up a Chevy guy. There's people that will never drive a Ford because they only want Chevy and vice versa. Dodge has made a nice move finding its way in the middle there. But when you look at loyalty, right, Americans are pretty loyal. Even if we leave a city, we'll still root for that football team we grew up rooting for. So when you think about what does China offer us, it just offers corporations cheaper labor, which means our labor gets executed. In 1990, China's GDP, the size of their country, and all their economic output was 330 billion. Texas, just today, Texas is a $2 trillion a year economy. Texas all by itself. And back in 1990, our economy was almost 6 trillion. So 1100% of a bigger country than China 34 years ago. So how did China get to be a 17, $18 trillion economy in 34 years? Our money, our factories. As you close the factories here and move them to China, sum total now is almost 75,000 manufacturing firms in America. That's everything from paper clips to, remember, RCA was a TV company. TVs were made in America. That's the only way to try to humanize the number, because 75,000, if you think of seats, that's about a football stadium, many. little under. The Rose Bowl, I think, holds 120,000 people. Now, just imagine 23 manufacturing firms in your county closed in the last 34 years. Why? Because of our politicians, because of our elected officials, because of our presidents. They allowed this to happen. Who was telling them it should happen? Our corporations, the lawyers, the lobbyists. Who's whispering in our elected officials' ears all day long, Monday through Friday? Not you, man. Not me. We're at
Right.
They ran, stood at a podium, made promises, looked pretty serious about defending the Constitution and our needs and rights, and then went to their job and completely ignored what they promised us. So the place I want to start, the source of everything matters. Our heads are up here where all these crazy issues are. BRICS, Chinese shooting down our satellites, sending what are these damn drones over New Jersey, sending hot air balloons over us? Where's COVID came from a lab in Wuhan. It did not happen because a bat spit in a pig's mouth. And we don't do anything against that country that starts all this hell. And we knew better because they were always communist, because they slaughtered 10,000 of their own students protesting the style of government the government wanted to be at Tiananmen Square. We almost elected an asshole who decided to get married at Tiananmen Square on the anniversary date of Tiananmen Square. His last name was Waltz, and thank God, hopefully we never have to hear from him or Kamala ever again. But wake up, people. When you think there's a force shield protecting you from outside threats or inside threats, I'm trying to make it a little bit my job to make you aware that you don't have that force shield. You are the force. China was
Right.
made in America, and about $280 trillion has flowed through their economy since 1990. And it was by design. China did not pull themselves up by their bootstraps. And they are
Right.
now well-financed, well-armed, and well-technologicalized, to follow George Bush when he makes up words at the podium, technologicalized to wipe us out because we are so dependent on our style of living. We are so dependent on satellites and digital communications. Our money is digital. And now there's someone talking about moving all of our money to a Bitcoin reserve. So if that got hacked, is there an 800 number we can call to get our money unhacked? You wouldn't even know where it went. So
Now, you
there's a lot.
mentioned digitization of our economy. It evolving even further now. I want to bring this up on the screen here because Trump announces a slate of tech appointments for his crypto council. And so after next month, the 20th, he'll be come the 47th. And he's made it clear that there will be a crypto council. David Sachs, a former venture capitalist, is going to lead the team with AI, crypto, and I think energy as three primary economic drivers that he's going to look to push for growth along with Doge to try to make up some of the inefficiencies in our government. Give us your thoughts on that. How would this impact Chinese relations? Because he's talking about the tariffs as well on goods being brought in. And so is this the way to counter that, or is this going to just further hinder the direction of our country?
The general, and again, I'm not a trained economist and I'm not a financial advisor, but I've been someone who's been looking into this for a long time. The first thing that really kicked off me well over a decade ago was, is gold and silver really necessary? If I was a salesman and I'm saying, hey, here's the benefits of gold and silver to someone who's curious about it, can I defend that? Is this temporary? Am I selling something that really has no value? If someone comes and paints your house, the paint has value for 10, 15 years before it starts peeling and you have to do it again. Does precious metals have a long-term value? And so I've researched the hell out of this to understand just for myself, am I wasting anyone's time? Am I wasting my own time? Does the gold and silver message have legs to it? And to me, it absolutely does, because the number one thing to recognize here, and it isn't about the personalities of Trump or anyone else that's actually in Washington. It's about the output of their decision-making and choice-making. Here's their first challenge, all of them. They've never been here before. There's never been a Bitcoin or currency council before. There's never been 36 trillion in debt before. The dollar's never only been worth 2.7 cents before. We've never had this many threats around us before. We've never been this broke before. The Federal Reserve has never been here before. They've never bailed out the financial world in its entirety in 2008, 9, 10, and 11 before. Central bank has never carried $9 trillion of debt on its books before. We've never had 70 million people retire before. We've never switched from a manufacturing country to a spending country before. So the number one thing about tariffs is, okay, so you're going to curtail spending. Because if a set of dishcloths at some big box store Cost 8. If Americans made it, it would cost dollars. If we put a tariff on now it's $16, I guess I'll just deal with my ratty a little longer. So another stat in 1990, 82% of all things consumed in this country were made in this country. Today, 11% of the things bought in this country were made here. Manufacturing is over. You can't bring that back. You're looking at minimum wage and the wage, a decent wage to pay an American worker to make a set of dishcloths here in America. You would just sell a hell of a lot less dishcloths than the volume you're selling because you're having them made in China. So when you think about causing us to buy less stuff made in China, then the economy just goes without that spending. 70% of our economic power in our country is caused because you and I rack up our cards or swipe out. We spend money. So if we only give 60%, then we're in the dark ages. We've imploded. Our economy seems to need every printed dollar and every dollar spent within its boundaries every second of the day, or it goes under. Like I heard a congressman saying yesterday on a show that I don't want to be responsible when we go off that cliff for all this fiscal irresponsibility. And it came to me, no, we went off the cliff in '09. All the money printing is what's keeping us airborne. Now think of that. Holy, insert cuss word here. We went off the cliff. When I look back at our GDP since 2009, a negative number, a shrinking number. Without the money printing, the GDP output has gone down. If you say, okay, how much did you print in 2018? And you back that out, we have a negative GDP. So we've been in a depression, mathematically speaking, since 2009. But you don't feel it because the debt has gone from 15 trillion back then to 36 trillion. So if you get 20 trillion from outside your economy, it's like illegal immigration. You get 20 trillion outside your economy because it came out of thin air. Yeah, it's going to produce an effect. It keeps the lights on. You can pay the bills you don't have the money to pay, but now your dollar dies as a resource. If you notice my thumb, I almost cut it off making Christmas Day. So if that resource dies, then everything the dollar supported, keeping us airborne, because we left firm ground about 15, 16 years ago, then we crash. And no one seems to understand that. So if Doge gets us to spend 2 trillion less on a government budget, which isn't possible, because maybe you'll remember, but maybe a lot of the audience certainly can remember that when we had to close a lot of military bases back in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, everyone was like, yeah, shrink the government, spend less money. There's too much. Close those bases. Just don't close the ones in my state. Don't close the one in my town. See? So what congressman is going to be able to go back to his people or her people and say, we cut? We're not going to get those bridge contracts. We're not going to get that factory built here. We're not going to get this or that or this or that. They'll be unelected. And that's where we're responsible. And that's where the Washington does a terrible job of actually informing us on what actually has been happening and what actually will happen based on all the precedents of reserve currency countries and the way they've ended up before us.
Very true, very true. And as a result of the great summation of everything you've put forth, mainstream economy is suffering severely. And of course, it's been becoming more evident as we hear more of the stats and the numbers come out. Let me share another headline with you that really shows where people are at these days. It says, buy now, pay later apps gaining popularity as an alternative to credit cards. So I have another article here that talks about credit cards as well. It says 36% of Americans took on holiday debt this year, averaging $1,100 a survey find. So the average person is clearly cashed out, strapped up to the T with debt, as well as our government. And so there will come a day of reckoning. And I believe that this upcoming year was going to be something that will be problematic. Given that, let me share another story here with you in reference to the debt refinancing. So you've laid out all the issues we've had that got us to this point, but under the last two administrations, they've gone on a debt binge, short-term debt, might I add, and says here, there's a $7 trillion refinancing challenge in 2025 for the U.S. Treasury. It's just to give you a visual aid of what that looks like as I scroll through this article here, which is very detailed. It paints so as you can see here, to the left side of this graph shows all the debt that was taken out that is due 24, 26, and 28. And then, of course, all the longer term debt out into the 40s, 50s, the later date maturity debt is very small. So 2025, you see this big spike here is $7 trillion that will come due. Now, my question that I'll be curious to get your thoughts on it as well as anybody else who's watching this, like, how does the Doge or the incoming president deal with this? Because You can't solve this with paying it off. You're going to have to do what? So what say you?
The quickest way to draw clarity that I've come up with, and some people don't like this analogy, but it works, just hear it. If an alien race that's probably visiting us just came to Washington and said, look, here's $100 trillion, pay off all your debts. And we didn't have to pay that back. That would clean up our debt and insolvency issue. Now, it wouldn't solve any of the problems. The problems behind all this are bills that keep coming every year, and they're bigger than the year before. And as our economy loses productivity, $36 trillion in debt is a visual on just how much money, pretty much since the year 2000, our economy couldn't produce to cover its bills.
Mhm.
That's what the number represents. It's really not even debt because no one's going to pay it back. If I borrowed, $1,000 from you, you'd think, all right, when are you going to pay me back? And we'd call it debt because it assumes that I'm going to pay you back, and I pay you back, and now debt's gone. No one's paying back $36 trillion in debt. So when you look at this and maybe another way to help people understand how big that number is. A billion seconds is 30 to 31 years. So most people are going to live at least 2 billion seconds. I'm 8 years away from 2 billion seconds old, 62 years old. I'm 54, 55. A trillion seconds is 31,000 years. So that's 31,000 years times 7. That's 210,000 years of money to try to humanize it. I know it might sound silly, but we got to try to understand just how ridiculous this is, how unhuman all of this debt is. And so how do you retire debt? It takes money. So they're going to print $7 trillion? I thought they were going to stop printing money. They can't stop printing money. And when folks wake up to that, when we see our final greatest Victorian charging at these issues in Donald Trump and the folks he wants to put around him, they aren't hitting the source of these bills, the creation of these bills. It's an ever increasing cost by the promises of Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, the military, and the interest on the debt. Those are immovable objects. They are movable. You literally can say, we can't sacrifice the financial future of our country to give retirees money anymore. You can do that. Then you piss off a lot of people. And there'd be tens of millions of people eating Alpo on a sidewalk for dinner. I'm just speaking mathematically. No one wants to do that. But mathematically, the laws of Mother Nature are just smiling at us because we don't get to have something for nothing. And again, all of the people, like I said before, no one's been here before. No one can turn to a blueprint on page 482 on a big 10 by 10 foot boardroom table and unfold it and look at all the buttons and levers that you push and pull to get the 7 trillion retired without an additional unwanted, undesirable consequence on the other side, like printing the money kills the money that's already in existence. This is what's scary as hell. And I really think that, yes, next year or the next 2 years, you're going to see a culmination of how all of the magic bullets that this administration will want to shoot at these issues and shoot those issues dead are inept and can't fix anything, like shooting a ghost.
Very true. So clearly, based upon all the math, you've given a lot of stats that people should definitely, when it comes to the times and trying to wrap their mind around the seconds in relation to the trillions, those numbers really make you think. But outside of the graphs and everything else, so I'll give you the last alarming little article here that I came across, and then we'll get into some ways in which people can just day by day, step by step. And I love just demonstrating with one Federal Reserve note at a time, how you can protect yourself against, it looks like the inevitable. Here, article said, this is from financialplanning.com. And it says here, 1 in 3 seniors has less than 50,000 in their 401ks, survey finds. And so not only are we going to have a retirement issue, we're going to have a monetary issue because of the debt issue. The average person who's invested in a good portion of their lives, they were not able to put enough aside for the rainy days. Yeah. And so it's never too late. But then again, there's certain ways that you should approach it now, given what we're facing. And that's where I want to point to what you do at Colonial Metals Group with helping people diversify outside of traditional pathways. And in particular, the self-directed IRA. And so for those who might be new, coming across this video for the first time, never know, we talked about the problems. Now, some strategies that people can take advantage of. That's where you do a good job of also helping people there. So yeah, with all that information I just gave, give us a little bit of the nuance of that particular pathway.
Just 54 years ago, the average salary in America was $9,000 a year. So I just point that out to show that 1 in 3 retirees have $50K in an IRA. If we back out all the inflation, all the money printing, If we back out all the artificial finance in our world, that $50,000 is $1,515. Everything has been inflated by a factor of 33. It would take 33 2024 $1 bills to equal something that cost you $1 in the 60s or the 70s. Your $1 million home is really just a $30,000 house. 33 times 30 grand is 990 grand. That's inflation. That's falsehood. 9 grand a year was the average salary in America in 1971, and a house cost twice as much as that. Imagine how easy life was, and mom didn't work. Imagine that. Now, those are two bookends. So what's the solution to these problems that you're bringing up, I'm bringing up, and we see in the news every day? You're the solution. The person watching this. You're the captain of a ship. Might not be the Enterprise, might feel like it's a dinghy, but it's not, because happiness fits into the smallest vessels. You're the defense. It's your decision making. It's where you want to spend the rest of your life. Fighting in the world of commerce up a hill that you can't get any headway from because of Washington and Wall Street's policies to print money causes everything you're pursuing to cost more than you can afford. And so you sacrifice your happiness and your peace and your youth and your joints and your physique. You fatten, you get slower, your hair falls out, you have all these autoimmune diseases, you have all these health issues. You reach for pharma to solve those, you end up with more. You look at the choices of where you're spending your life. Look at where your feet are and look at where your mind is all the time. Is your mind where your feet are? Most of the time, it's not. The defense to this is making sure that you can do what you need to summon the courage, the strength, and the guts and the awareness to change how your life goes, is making sure that the kids end up with some college debt and are thrust out into this world of commerce to compete. And the odds are they end up with a life they're not happy with because they can never really rest on the weekends, because all they're thinking about on Monday is all the things they have to do to try and hope to get a raise or a promotion or end up in a position where their income finally outweighs their costs. And do you know how rare that's going to work out for people? In 1990, there were 66 billionaires in this country. Today, there's 1,000. But 70% of Americans said that life in America sucks when they left the exit polls from the election. It's essentially what they said. They said inflation, which means the cost of everything, is a giant pain in the ass, causing them to not be able to arrive at happiness. Happiness is not a destination, it's a decision. So when you look at where your money's located, it's located in the dollar. All of your savings is in the dollar. It's in this monopoly game that we keep losing. And the Federal Reserve and the federal government just keeps pulling more monopoly boards out from behind their back and opening up the box and taking the bank out and throwing all that money into the game. When you and I can't do that. Eventually, there's no more monopoly boards behind them to pull forward and open and throw the bank into the game because they're beyond bankrupt. Beyond. Like bankrupt isn't even a word to describe the epic nature of the of financial failure by our leadership here in this country. And financing China is one of the biggest examples I could possibly come up with because they're a threat to your freedom and your financial peace of mind. Our leadership is the threat. So you rise up by making decisions about where you want to toil, where you want to spend the most precious gift you have, which is air in your lungs and a beating heart in your chest. Where do you want to spend that time? Being angry about Washington? Being angry about how you've been betrayed? Recognize you've been betrayed and spend your time in a more fruitful manner. That's my message. Where your money's located. It could be in gold and silver. It could be in the digital world. It could be inflated real estate. It could be in other things. But you make your money great again when it's actually in something great. And gold and silver isn't even from this planet. That's how scarce and rare and special it is. Created by two of our smashing together. Created all the rare earth minerals and gold and silver. That's how special that stuff is. So when you look at, again, trusting people, foreigners in Washington, D.C. that you have no relation to and are not going to create some legislation that makes you all squared away, don't necessarily see them as bad people. Just see them as people who can't do the job you thought they were going to do, which is defend the Constitution and create a force shield against issues, immunizing you from all the craziness that's actually here in our dirt today. You have to do that.
Very true. Very true. Paul Stone, as always, it's great to get your thoughts and analysis on things. You do a good job of really bringing it home, giving some people something to really chew on, because those numbers, those math calculations in relation to dollars and time still churning in my head right now. But as always, thank you for joining us. And for those who might be coming across this for the first time, I want to point to them where they can find out more. colonialsmetalsgroup.com. You can get this opportunity to download a very informative and detailed pamphlet here with more information on steps that you can take. And once again, colonialsmetalsgroup.com, links in the description. And as always, Paul, it's great to connect with you, man. And I wish you very prosperous 2025 and beyond as we get into the time frames that we talked about during this show here. And of course, prepare for the worst, but pray for the best as always. And my good friend, I appreciate you for taking your time and joining us.
I appreciate all of our American brothers and sisters. This is our place. This is our place. And there's been a lot of great things said at a podium that caused us to turn our power over to others because they said, well, we can make your world so much better. You don't have to lift a finger. Just put us in power and we'll make that happen for you. Over the last 50 years, has life gotten better for us average individual Americans in this country or worse? If it's gotten worse, then that's a track record. We need to switch things up at home. Realize life is happening where your feet are. That's where life's happening. How do you want that life to go? Amen. Don't mean to lecture. That's just useful and a useful perspective.
Words of wisdom, my friend. I appreciate you. Everybody, thank you as always for joining us. If you found any value, hit that thumbs up, subscribe, share this. And of course, throughout all this interview here, there's different viewpoints, a different subject matter. Take clips of it, share so people can get an alternative perspective as to what's really happening. Because as I always say, you won't get the truth from the mainstream media. So be blessed, be safe, and I'll see you guys later. Catch you later.